Graph the following function on the interval -5 to 5. Y equals arc cosine 1/3 x. I find that the best thing to do for graphing these functions is to make a small table of values. Okay, x and y. Now, looking at these graphs, the samples that we have, it seems like it's reaching its extreme values at -3 and +3, and then 0 would be right in the middle. So do you see how that's happening for all the graphs? -3, +3, 0 is right in the middle. It's all happening. -3, +3, 0. -3, +3, and 0 in the middle. So that's why I'm going to pick -3, 0, and +3 for the x values that I'm going to check. Now, for the y values, we're simply going to substitute these values in. So let's say if x is -3, then y will equal the inverse cosine. Arc cosine is the same thing as inverse cosine. So the inverse cosine of 1/3 times -3. All right, I'm just substituting -3 in for x. Well, that's going to be the inverse cosine of -1. 1/3 times -3 is -1. Okay, if you need to, think of it this way. This is 1/3 times -3/1. And you multiply straight across, so this would be -3/3. That's why I'm getting -1. So the question though is, what is the inverse cosine of -1? Well, an inverse trig function is an angle. It's the angle whose cosine is -1. So in other words, where is the cosine equal to -1? Well, let's look at a unit circle. Okay, on the unit circle, cosine is the x value. So the question is, where is the x value equal to -1? All right, the cosine of what angle is equal to -1? Well, look at these key points. Right here, this is the point 1, 0. So the x value is 1. This is the point 0, 1. The x value here is 0. This is the point -1, 0. The x value here is -1. That's what we were looking for. Where is the x value equal to -1? So this is the spot. Now down here at the bottom, this is 0, -1. The x value is 0. So this is the only place on the unit circle where the x value is -1. And this is pi. All right, starting from here, this is 0, this is pi/2, and then this is pi. So at -3, we're going to get pi for the answer. The inverse cosine of -1 is pi. Okay, now what happens if we plug in 0 instead? Okay, so this is going to be 1/3 times 0. Obviously that's just going to be 0, so y equals the inverse cosine of 0. Again, an inverse trig function is an angle. It's the angle whose cosine is 0. So what angle has a cosine of 0? We're still looking at the x values. So can you see that there are actually two angles where the x value is 0? Okay, it could be pi over 2, or it could be 3 pi over 2. Well, you're not allowed to have two answers, so that's why they have some restrictions on the inverse cosine function. This is one of those times that you have to take notes. So these are the restrictions on the inverse trig functions. You need to write these down, and anytime there is an inverse trig function, you need to refer back to these notes. So for example, we're dealing with inverse cosine right now. Inverse cosine is only defined from 0 to pi, the top half of the unit circle. So that's how we know that the answer is going to be pi over 2 and not 3 pi over 2. It's only defined up here in the top. So the answer is pi over 2. Okay, now one more time. Now we have an x value of 3. If we put in 3, what do we get? Well, that's going to be the inverse cosine of 1. Inverse cosine is an angle. It's the angle whose cosine is 1. So what angle has a cosine of 1? Cosine is the x value. So this is a cosine of 1. This is 0 degrees or 0 radians. So the answer is 0. So these are the 3 points that we have. -3 comma pi. Okay, so let's just check these one at a time until they fail. So -3, we should be at pi. So here I go to -3, and then pi is up here. So this graph is not the answer because it's not up here. Okay, what about option C? Again, -3 comma pi is way up here. This graph is not up here. So that's not the answer. Okay, -3 comma pi is right here, so that's not the answer. But option D looks good. -3 comma pi is right there. What about 0 comma pi over 2? Here's 0, and pi over 2 would be right there in the middle. And then we have 3 comma 0. 3 comma 0 would be right here. So clearly D is the answer. Let's go ahead and check the official answer. And now you know.